Edward Miller, a humble and kind-hearted elderly millionaire, never cared for appearances or the trappings of wealth. To most, he was just another ordinary old man, but beneath his simple exterior lay a deep love for his family, especially his grandson Arthur, whose greatest dream was to ride in a Ferrari. Determined to fulfill this wish, Edward visited a luxury car dealership, only to be met with disdain and mockery due to his modest attire. Undeterred by the humiliation, Edward's unwavering love for his grandson led him to find a true ally in Ryan, a compassionate salesman who saw beyond appearances. What started as a simple purchase transformed into a journey of empathy and kindness that brought together people from different walks of life. Despite the obstacles, Edward's perseverance resulted in Arthur experiencing the joy of his dream parcel ride, even as he bravely battled a devastating illness. The story takes us from moments of joy to heart-wrenching sadness, but ultimately it is a tale of love, fulfillment, and the enduring legacy of a little boy who inspired a community to be better, to be kinder, and to believe in the power of dreams. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Edward Miller, a man whose life story was woven with extraordinary experiences, walked into a luxury car dealership one fateful day, only to be dismissed because of his appearance. Dressed in clothes that had seen better days, his faded shirt and worn-out shoes spoke of a man who had lived a humble life. Yet, beneath this unassuming exterior, Edward harbored a wealth of wisdom and an even greater fortune that few knew about. At 78 years old, he had amassed a significant fortune, but to the casual observer, he was just another elderly man, blending into the background with his quiet demeanor and modest attire. Edward's life was a testament to the belief that true worth is not measured by outward appearances but by the depth of one's character and the kindness of their actions. Residing in a modest suburban home, he led a life of simplicity and purpose. His days were filled with small, meaningful rituals, a peaceful morning walk through his neighborhood where he exchanged warm greetings with old friends, moments of reflection in his cherished garden, and the comfort of reading his favorite books. Most importantly, Edward found immense joy in spending time with his daughter, Alice, and his beloved grandson, Arthur. Alice, a resilient woman, had endured the hardships of a difficult divorce, and Edward's presence was a constant source of strength for her. Despite the wealth that was quietly nestled in his bank account, Edward lived a life that many would consider frugal, almost monastic. He had never been one to chase after material possessions or flaunt his riches. Years ago, he had won an enormous sum in the lottery, a secret he kept close to his heart. Instead of indulging in a lavish lifestyle, he chose to live simply, carefully investing his money and saving it for moments of true necessity. For Edward, happiness was never found in the accumulation of wealth. It was found in the love of his family and the simple pleasures of life. The turning point came during one of Arthur's hospital stays. At just 7 years old, Arthur had an infectious enthusiasm for life, and his eyes sparkled with excitement whenever he talked about his greatest passion cars. Not just any cars, but the sleek, powerful machines that symbolize speed, adventure, and a boundless sense of freedom. Among them, the Ferrari stood out as the ultimate dream, a symbol of everything that Arthur longed for. Moved by his grandson's unbridled enthusiasm and the dreams that danced in his young mind, Edward made a decision that would forever change their lives. He resolved to buy Arthur a Ferrari, not as a mere gift, but as a fulfillment of a boy's deepest desire. The thought of seeing Arthur's face light up with pure joy became Edward's driving force. On a bright Saturday morning, with his mind set on this mission, Edward put on his best shirt. Though it was the newest in his collection, it still bore the marks of time, much like Edward himself. As he left his house, a sense of determination filled his heart. He knew that walking into a luxury dealership would be a daunting experience, far removed from the life he was accustomed to. The very thought of it made him feel slightly uneasy. A world where wealth was often judged by the clothes one wore rather than the content of their soul. But all of that faded in comparison to the image of Arthur's radiant smile. For Edward, nothing mattered more than seeing that smile, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make his grandson's dream come true. As Edward made his way to the dealership, his thoughts wandered to the role money had played in his life. Despite his wealth, it had never been a priority for him. He valued simplicity and the intangible joys of life far more than the fleeting satisfaction that material possessions could bring. Yet today he was prepared to use his wealth in a way that truly mattered to bring a moment of pure happiness to his beloved grandson, Arthur. With this resolve in mind, Edward arrived at the dealership, its grand facade of glass and gleaming steel standing as a symbol of luxury and status. Taking a deep breath, Edward stepped through the entrance, his footsteps calm yet determined. The showroom was a world of polished elegance, where every surface sparkled under the bright, flawless lights. The cars, each one a masterpiece of engineering and design, gleamed like jewels on display. Among them, a Ferrari caught Edward's eye, its sleek lines and powerful presence captivating his attention. It was more than just a curry. It was the embodiment of his grandson's dreams, a dream that Edward was intent on making a reality. As he stood there lost in admiration, a sharp voice broke through his thoughts. "May I help you, sir?" The words, though polite, were laced with a condescending tone. Edward turned to see Andrew, the dealership's manager, approaching him. Andrew's suit was immaculate, his gaze sharp and assessing. He was a man who prided himself on quickly sizing up potential customers, and to him, Edward's worn clothes and humble demeanor screamed anything but wealthy. Despite the obvious disdain in Andrew's voice, Edward remained unfazed. He met the manager's critical gaze with a calm resolve. "Yes," Edward replied, his voice steady. "I'm interested in buying a Ferrari." Andrew's reaction was immediate. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, followed by barely suppressed laughter. The idea that this elderly man, dressed so plainly, could be serious about purchasing such an expensive car seemed utterly ridiculous to him. "A Ferrari?" Andrew repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Are you certain, sir? These vehicles are quite out of the ordinary and not exactly what you might be accustomed to." Edward, unwavering in his purpose, simply nodded. "I know exactly what I want. My grandson dreams of riding in a Ferrari, and I intend to buy one for him." For a brief moment, Andrew was silent, staring at Edward as if trying to decipher whether this was all some elaborate joke. The silence stretched, feeling like an eternity to Edward, but as the seconds ticked by, and it became clear that Edward was completely serious, Andrew's expression shifted from disbelief to thinly veiled disdain. "Listen," Andrew began, his voice now tinged with irritation. "I think you need to reconsider. Our Ferraris are not for everyone. Perhaps you'd be better off looking for something more within your means." The condescension in Andrew's words was unmistakable, and it stung. But Edward, determined not to let his dignity be trampled, tried once more to make himself understood. "I'm not joking, young man. I have the funds, and I intend to make this purchase today." But Andrew was done listening. His patience, already thin, snapped. Stepping closer, he gestured brusquely toward the exit, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've heard enough. It's best if you leave now before I have to call security. We don't want any trouble here." Edward stood there for a moment, the humiliation washing over him in waves. He had come with the simple hope of fulfilling his grandson's dream, only to be met with disrespect and scorn. But as he turned to leave, a quiet resolve formed within him. This was not the end, far from it. Edward knew that he would return, and when he did, the very people who had dismissed him would be left in shock. The harsh words struck Edward like a physical blow, leaving him stunned and wounded in a way he hadn't experienced in years. A man of his age, accustomed to life's challenges and rarely perturbed by minor slights, suddenly felt a wave of shame and sorrow wash over him. He had come to this place with a heart full of hope, eager to fulfill a simple wish for his beloved grandson, only to be met with coldness and contempt. The sting of the encounter left him shaken, and as he turned to leave, the weight of the old wallet in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped it. The small leather pouch holding not just money, but the dignity that had just been so callously trampled upon. With each step toward the exit, the glass doors ahead reflected the disappointment etched into his lined face. His plans, which had seemed so straightforward just moments ago, now felt distant and derailed, his spirit bruised by the unwarranted humiliation. Just as he was about to cross the threshold and leave the dealership behind, a gentle voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. "Sir, please wait," called a young, friendly voice. Edward paused, turning slowly to see a young man hurrying toward him. The man, Ryan, was one of the dealership's salesmen, and unlike Andrew, his expression was warm and sincere, carrying none of the judgment that had marred the earlier interaction. Ryan's demeanor brought a small, unexpected wave of relief to Edward's aching heart. "I'm truly sorry for my colleague's attitude," Ryan said, his voice laced with genuine regret. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Please come back. I would be honored to show you the cars." Edward hesitated, the bitterness of Andrew's words still fresh and echoing in his mind. His instinct was to leave, to protect himself from further humiliation. But there was something in Ryan's voice and honesty, a kindness that made him pause. This was not the response he had anticipated in such a place, and it gave him reason to reconsider. "I don't know," Edward murmured, still unsure whether he should stay or go. Ryan quickly picked up on his uncertainty, his tone gentle yet persuasive. "I understand, sir," he said, his voice full of empathy. "But if you truly want to make your grandson's dream come true, allow me to help. Let us take our time and look at these cars together. I promise you, this experience will be different." As Ryan spoke, Andrew, who had been watching the scene unfold with impatience, received a phone call that demanded his immediate attention. Something urgent, apparently unrelated to the dealership, required his presence elsewhere. In a huff, Andrew stormed out, leaving the showroom and Edward in Ryan's capable hands. Edward stood there, weighing his options. The sting of Andrew's earlier remarks hadn't yet faded, but as he looked into Ryan's eyes, he saw a genuine desire to help. It was as if the young man understood, on some deeper level, what this moment meant to Edward. After a moment's hesitation, Edward sighed and nodded, deciding to place his trust in Ryan. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to make Arthur's dream a reality. A broad smile spread across Ryan's face as he extended his hand to Edward. "Thank you, sir. Let's find the perfect Ferrari for your grandson together." Edward followed Ryan through the opulent showroom, past rows of Ferraris gleaming under the bright lights. The vibrant colors and sleek designs were breathtaking, each car a testament to the artistry of automotive engineering. Ryan began to explain the technical specifications of each model with enthusiasm, detailing the power, speed, and advanced technology that made these cars so exceptional. His excitement was palpable, his passion for the cars evident in every word. But while Ryan spoke with fervor, Edward found it difficult to focus entirely on the young man's words. His mind kept drifting back to Arthur, to the boy's bright eyes and infectious laughter, and to the weight of responsibility Edward felt as his grandfather. The brilliance of the cars before him couldn't fully distract from the underlying concern that gnawed at his heart, the constant worry for his grandson's future and the desire to see him happy, if only for a moment. The weight of Arthur's dream to ride in a Ferrari pressed heavily on Edward, a responsibility he felt compelled to fulfill, no matter the cost. As they walked through the showroom, Ryan noticed the distant look in Edward's eyes and paused, sensing that there was more to this visit than just purchasing a luxury car. "Mr. Edward," Ryan began gently, "I get the feeling that there's something deeper driving your interest in this car. It seems like this isn't just about owning a Ferrari." Edward, a man who had always kept his emotions close, felt a surprising sense of trust toward Ryan. Perhaps it was the sincerity in the young man's voice, or the genuine concern in his eyes. Whatever it was, Edward decided it was time to share the true reason for his visit. He sighed deeply, the weight of his words heavy on his heart. "Ryan, you're right. I'm not here simply to buy a car. My visit is about my grandson, Arthur." Ryan listened intently, his expression encouraging Edward to continue. "Arthur is only 7, Edward said, his voice trembling slightly, "but life has already been so difficult for him. He's always been such a lively boy, with a passion for cars that's unmatched. To him, Ferraris are like magic, something almost otherworldly, something he's always dreamed of experiencing." Edward paused, struggling to keep his emotions in check. Ryan could see the depth of feeling in every word, but he sensed there was more to the story. Then, Edward continued, his voice softer, tinged with profound sadness. "Recently we discovered that Arthur is sick," he said, the words catching in his throat. "He's been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It is a degenerative disease that is slowly taking away the things he loves most. The doctors have told us that we don't have much time, and all I want is to make his dream come true before it's too late. I want him to have the chance to ride in a Ferrari, even if it is just once. That is all I am here for." The mention of the disease hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. He had heard of multiple sclerosis, but the idea of a child facing such a cruel fate was almost unbearable. He looked at Edward and saw not just an elderly man, but a grandfather desperately trying to bring a moment of joy to his grandson amid a heart-wrenching reality. "Mr. Edward," Ryan began, but his voice faltered under the weight of his emotions. He took a moment to compose himself and then continued, "I am so sorry. I had no idea what you and your family are going through." Edward nodded, appreciating the empathy in Ryan's voice. "All I want is to give Arthur a moment of happiness, something that he can hold on to in these difficult times," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ryan, now filled with a renewed sense of purpose, realized that this was more than just a sale. It was an opportunity to make a meaningful impact on someone's life, to be part of something truly significant. He knew he had to act swiftly and with care. "Mr. Edward, I promise you, I will do everything in my power to help you and Arthur," Ryan said with determination. "I need to speak to my mother, Abigail, who owns this dealership. She needs to hear your story. I am sure she will want to help." Edward looked at Ryan with a mixture of surprise and deep gratitude. "You would do that for us?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. "Absolutely," Ryan replied with conviction. "This isn't just a transaction. It is a chance to bring a little bit of light into Arthur's life, and we'll all do everything we can to make sure he has that chance." Ryan was profoundly moved by Edward's story and the gravity of Arthur's wish. It was clear that this was not just about selling a luxury car. It was about helping a grandfather fulfill a final dream for his grandson, who was facing an unimaginable struggle. With a sense of urgency and resolve, Ryan stepped away from Edward momentarily and picked up the phone to call his mother, Abigail. He knew that this was a situation that required her involvement not just as a business owner but as a person with a compassionate heart. Ryan dialed the number with slightly trembling hands, the urgency of the moment intensifying within him. As the phone rang, he felt the weight of what was at stake. When Abigail answered, her voice was tinged with concern. "Ryan, is everything all right? It is unusual for you to call during business hours," she said, sensing that something important was happening. "Mom," Ryan began, trying to steady his voice, "I need to talk to you about something. There's a man here, Mr. Edward Miller, and he does not just looking to buy a car. His grandson, Arthur, is very sick, and all he wants is to fulfill his dream of riding in a Ferrari. I think we need to help them, Mom. This is more than just a sale. This is about making a difference in a little boy's life." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line as Abigail absorbed the weight of what Ryan was telling her. Then, with a voice full of warmth and understanding, she replied, "I'm on my way, Ryan. We'll make sure that Arthur's dream comes true. Mom, I need you to come to the dealership right away." "It's urgent," Ryan said, his voice steady but laced with an underlying tension that was impossible to conceal. "Ryan, what's happening? Is everything okay there?" Abigail's voice on the other end of the line carried a note of concern, sensing that something was amiss. "It's not about the store, Mom. It is a different kind of situation. There is a man here, Edward Miller, and he wants to buy a Ferrari, but it is not just about the car. His story. It is something you need to hear in person. Please, come as soon as you can. It is about his grandson, Arthur. He's very sick, and this purchase is much more than just a car to him." Abigail fell silent for a moment, taking in the gravity of Ryan's words. She trusted her son's instincts, and if he said it was serious, she knew she had to be there immediately. "I'm on my way," Abigail replied with resolve. Don't let Mr. Red resolve. I'll get there as fast as I can." After ending the call, Ryan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He knew his mother would approach the situation with the compassion and sensitivity it required. Now, his focus shifted to making sure Edward felt at ease while they waited. As Ryan walked back to where Edward was seated, he noticed the elderly man still bore a worried expression, his hands resting on his lap as he stared down, lost in thoughts of Arthur. The encounter with Andrew and the weight of his situation had left him feeling uncertain and vulnerable. "Mr. Edward, my mother is on her way," Ryan said with a reassuring smile. "She is looking forward to meeting you and hearing your story." Edward looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "She's coming. I don't want to be any trouble." "Not at all," Ryan replied warmly, taking a seat next to Edward. "She cares deeply about what we do here, and I am certain she'll want to help in any way she can." Edward nodded, feeling a small sense of comfort from Ryan's words. Ryan, sensing that Edward needed something to distract him from the weight of his worries, decided to engage him in conversation about the cars. He pointed to one of the sleek models nearby, hoping to lift Edward's spirits, even if just a little. "Mr. Edward, did you know this Ferrari here is one of the fastest models we have? It can go from 0 to 60 mph in under 3 seconds, Ryan said with enthusiasm. "I imagine Arthur would be thrilled to see this." A faint smile crossed Edward's face. He would be fascinated. Arthur has always had a deep love for cars. Ever since he was little, he's collected miniature models and could name them all by heart. Ryan continued the conversation, asking more about Arthur and his interests, genuinely interested in learning more about the boy who, despite never having met him, had already touched his heart. As Edward spoke of his grandson, his eyes reflected a blend of pride and sorrow, revealing just how much Arthur meant to him and how desperate he was to give him this one special moment of joy. Every detail Edward shared about Arthur brought the boy to life in Ryan's mind, a young child, full of dreams and passion, now facing a harsh reality far too early in life. The bond between grandfather and grandson was palpable, and Ryan felt a deepening resolve to do everything in his power to help make this dream come true. As they waited for Abigail, the minutes seemed to pass more comfortably, with the conversation providing Edward a brief respite from the heavy thoughts that had weighed him down. Ryan's kind words and genuine interest made the elderly man feel less alone in his mission, offering a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, Arthur's dream could still come true. As the minutes ticked by, the conversation between Ryan and Edward flowed easily, creating a warm atmosphere in the showroom. Ryan continued to keep Edward engaged, showcasing more Ferrari models, delving into the brand's illustrious history, and even sharing some light-hearted anecdotes from previous customers. With each passing moment, Edward began to feel more at ease, comforted by the genuine care Ryan showed for both him and his grandson. Then, after what felt like no time at all, the dealership doors opened once again, and Abigail walked in. She was a woman of commanding presence, her posture exuding both authority and grace. Her eyes quickly scanned the room until they settled on Ryan and Edward, still deep in conversation. Without hesitation, Ryan rose from his seat to greet his mother. "Mom, this is Mr. Edward Miller," he said, motioning toward the elderly man with a respectful nod. Abigail approached with a warm, sincere smile and extended her hand to Edward. "Mr. Miller, it is a pleasure to meet you. Ryan has told me about your visit, and I'm here to assist in any way I can." Edward stood up slowly, his movements reflecting both age and the weight of his emotions. He shook Abigail's hand, his expression one of profound gratitude. "Thank you so much for coming, Mrs. Abigail. I wasn't sure who else to turn to, but your son has been incredibly kind to me." "Ryan has always had a good heart," Abigail replied, casting a proud glance at her son. "Now please tell me more about Arthur and how we can help fulfill his dream." Edward took a deep breath, preparing to share his story once again. He recounted Arthur's love for cars, his enduring fascination with Ferraris, and the devastating diagnosis that had cast a shadow over their lives. As he spoke, Abigail listened with rapt attention, her expression softening with each detail. Edward described how, despite his young age, Arthur had developed an almost mystical connection with cars, especially Ferraris. To Arthur, these vehicles weren't just machinesy. They were symbols of everything he admired: speed, power, and the freedom he longed for. Arthur's eyes light up whenever he sees a Ferrari, Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. He talks about them as if they are alive, as if they hold a special kind of magic. All he wants is the chance to ride in one, even if it is just once. I would do anything to make that wish come true. Abigail's eyes filled with empathy as she absorbed Edward's words. She could see the deep love he had for his grandson and the desperation to provide him with a moment of pure happiness amid their struggles. Mr. Struggles, Edward, Abigail began gently, her voice carrying the weight of her compassion. I can see how much Arthur means to you, and I want to help make his dream a reality. This isn't just about selling a car, it is about creating a memory that will stay with him forever. Edward felt a wave of relief wash over him, sensing that Abigail truly understood the significance of what he was asking for. Thank you, Mrs. Abigail, he said, his voice trembling with gratitude. I can tell you how much this means to me and Arthur. Abigail nodded, her resolve firm. We are going to make this happen, Mr. Edward. We'll do everything we can to give Arthur the experience he'd has dreamed of. Ryan, who had been quietly observing the exchange, felt a deep sense of pride and relief. He knew that, with his mother's involvement, they would be able to fulfill Arthur's wish in a way that would honor the boy's spirit and his grandfather's love. The three of them, Abigail, Ryan, and Edward, now shared a common goal, united by the desire to bring a moment of joy into a little boy's life. Abigail felt the warmth of a tear escape her eye, quickly brushing it away with the tip of her fingers. The simplicity and profoundness of Edward's wish moved her deeply. This was no ordinary transaction. It was about something far more significant than selling a luxury car. It was about giving a child, fighting a difficult battle, a moment of pure joy. Mr. Edward, Abigail began, her voice soft yet resolute, your story has truly touched my heart. I can't fathom the pain your family is enduring, but I understand how much this moment would mean to Arthur. That's why I've come to a decision. Edward's heart skipped a beat, and Ryan looked on with anticipation, eager to hear his mother's words. I want to offer you the Ferrari at no cost, Abigail said, her smile warm and sincere. Consider it a gift from us to Arthur. He deserves to experience this, and we would be honored to be part of that special moment. For a moment, Edward stood in stunned silence, struggling to process what Abigail had just said. It was an offer so generous, so unexpected, that it left him momentarily speechless. Ryan, standing beside him, beamed with pride at his mother's decision, knowing how much it would mean to both Edward and Arthur. Miss Abigail, I don't know how to thank you, Edward stammered, his voice thick with emotion as he tried to grasp the enormity of the gift being offered. There is no need for thanks, Mr. Edward, Abigail responded gently. This is something we want to do for Arthur. We couldn't possibly charge for something that holds such deep meaning for your family. Edward remained quiet for a few more moments, his eyes moist with unshed tears, but soon a look of determination crossed his face. He recognized the incredible kindness behind Abigail's gesture, but he also knew that he had the means to pay for the car. He wanted to honor the offer in a way that was true to his principles, not out of pride, but out of a sense of fairness and integrity that had guided him throughout his life. Miss Abigail, Edward began, his voice now steadier, your generosity means more to me than I can express. It truly touches my heart, but I need to be honest with you. I am not a poor man. Many years ago, I won a substantial fortune in the lottery, but I chose to live a simple life because I believe that money should never define who we are. Abigail and Ryan exchanged astonished glances, taken aback by the revelation. The modestly dressed man who had seemed to have so little was, in fact, a millionaire. But what struck them most wasn't the hidden wealth, but the humility with which Edward had lived his life, never letting his fortune alter his values. I appreciate what you want to do, Edward continued, his voice filled with sincerity, and I am deeply grateful. But I must insist on paying for the Ferrari. I have the resources and I want this transaction to be just. Your gesture will always hold incredible value to me, but it is important to me that this exchange remains fair. Abigail looked at Edward, her respect for him growing even more. Here was a man who had every reason to accept a gift, yet he stood firm in his desire to contribute, to ensure that the transaction reflected his sense of justice. She nodded, understanding the depth of his conviction. "Mr. Edward," she said, "I respect your decision, and we will honor your wish to pay for the car. But please know that we are still committed to making this experience as special as possible for Arthur. We'll take care of all the arrangements, and I promise you that this will be a moment your grandson will never forget." Edward smiled, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over him. He knew that he had done the right thing, staying true to his principles while accepting the kindness offered to him. "Thank you, Miss Abigail, and thank you, Ryan," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've given us more than just a car. You've given us hope and a memory that will last a lifetime." Ryan, still beaming with pride, stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on Edward's shoulder. "We are honored to be part of this, Mr. Edward. Let us make Arthur's dream come true." And with that, they began to plan the perfect day for Arthur, a day filled with speed, excitement, and the magic of a Ferrari. A day where the love of a grandfather and the kindness of strangers would come together to create a moment of pure, unforgettable joy. Abigail stood at the entrance of the room, her expression a storm of controlled fury and disappointment. The document she had been holding in her hand now seemed like a mere afterthought as she took in the scene unfolding before her. She had heard enough of Andrew's cruel words to know exactly what had transpired. The arrogance, the disrespect, the sheer disregard for the dignity of another human being, especially someone like Edward, who had only shown humility and kindness, were utterly unacceptable. "Andrew," Abigail's voice was firm, each syllable cutting through the air with precision. The sound of her voice made Andrew freeze in place, his face draining of color as he slowly turned to face her, the realization of his grave mistake dawning on him. His eyes widened in panic as he met her steely gaze. "Miss Abigail, I didn't realize," Andrew stammered, but the words faltered under the weight of her penetrating stare. He knew no excuse could justify his behavior, no explanation that could undo the damage he had just caused. Abigail took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Andrew's. "Not another word, Andrew," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "What you've done here is not only unprofessional but disgraceful. This dealership has always prided itself on treating every person who walks through those doors with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. You have failed to uphold that standard in the worst possible way." Andrew's mouth opened and closed as if searching for a response, but nothing came. He was utterly at a loss, the gravity of his actions sinking in as the silence grew heavier. Abigail then turned to Edward, her expression softening as she addressed him directly. "Mr. Edward, I deeply apologize for what you've just experienced. Please know that Andrew's behavior in no way reflects the values we hold here. You deserve nothing but respect and kindness, especially after the way you've conducted yourself today." Edward, who had remained seated, trying to process the sudden turn of events, nodded slowly. He appreciated Abigail's words, but the sting of Andrew's insults still lingered. However, he was a man who believed in rising above such moments, and he was determined not to let this incident mar what was supposed to be a joyful day for him and his grandson. Ryan, who had been watching the scene with a mixture of anger and disbelief, stepped closer to Edward, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Edward, please don't let this spoil what we dare to accomplish. Arthur's dream is what matters most, and we're going to make sure that dream comes true." Abigail's attention then returned to Andrew, who still stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing but unable to form a coherent thought. "Andrew," Abigail said, her voice now cold and final, "you are dismissed from this dealership effective immediately. Your behavior is inexcusable, and I will not tolerate such disrespect in my business. Collect your things and leave at once." Andrew's face went pale as the reality of her words hit him. "Miss Abigail, please," he began to plead, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "There is nothing more to discuss." "Leave now," she repeated, her tone brooking no further argument. Defeated and humiliated, Andrew turned and walked out of the room, his head hanging low. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Abigail took a deep breath, trying to dispel the lingering tension. She then looked back at Edward, offering him a kind smile. "Mr. Ingram, Edward, I am truly sorry for what happened, but I assure you we are here to make sure Arthur gets the experience he deserves." Edward smiled, a small but genuine expression of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Abigail. It means a lot to me that you have handled this situation with such care. I didn't expect this, but I am grateful for your support." With the uncomfortable episode now behind them, Abigail and Ryan returned to the task at hand, finalizing the details of the Ferrari purchase with renewed purpose. They knew that this day would be unforgettable not only because of the car they were about to deliver to Arthur, but because of the values they had upheld in the face of adversity. As they completed the paperwork, the atmosphere shifted back to one of anticipation and excitement. The unpleasant encounter with Andrew was now just a small shadow in the background, far outweighed by the promise of a joyous moment that would soon be shared by Edward and his grandson. The Ferrari would soon be ready, and with it, the fulfillment of a dream that would forever be cherished. "I heard everything," Abigail said, cutting off any attempt Andrew might have made to defend himself. Her voice was cold, each word sharp and deliberate. "I am completely disgusted by your behavior. How dare you speak to a customer like that? How dare you mock someone, especially after everything he shared with us?" Andrew turned pale, the blood draining from his face as he tried to stammer out an explanation. But Abigail wasn't interested in hearing any excuses. She was beyond furious, her anger controlled but evident in every syllable she spoke. "This kind of attitude is utterly unacceptable," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I have always valued treating our customers with respect and dignity, regardless of how they dress or appear. You, Andrew, have miserably failed to demonstrate those values." Ryan stood by, watching the confrontation in silence. He knew his mother was about to make a drastic decision. There was a sense of satisfaction in seeing Andrew held accountable, but the intensity of the situation also brought a slight discomfort. Still, he trusted his mother's judgment completely. Abigail took a step closer to Andrew, her eyes locked on his. "Several customers have already complained about you to me, and I've tried to give you chances to improve," she said, her voice low but cutting. "But this is the last straw. You are fired, Andrew. Now, get out of my store." Andrew was dumbfounded, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. He tried to process what had just happened, but the finality in Abigail's tone left no room for argument. There was nothing he could say to change her decision. His face burning with shame, he turned and left the dealership without a word, not even glancing back. The door closed behind him, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Abigail took a deep breath, trying to calm herself after the intense confrontation. She then turned to Edward, her expression softening, her voice gentle once more. "Mr. Edward, I sincerely apologize for Andrew's behavior. He acted completely inappropriately, and I hope you know that this doesn't reflect the values that my family and I uphold." Edward, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke, his voice calm but thoughtful. "I appreciate it, Miss Abigail. You did what you thought was right, and I respect that. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to make a request." Abigail looked at him curiously, her anger from moments before dissipating. "Of course, Mr. Edward. What do you wish?" Edward took a deep breath, his tone gentle and forgiving. "I believe in second chances," he began. "Your son Ryan gave me a second chance today by calling me back into the store and listening to my story. I'd like you to consider giving Andrew the same opportunity. Maybe he needs to learn to be kind, but I believe he can change." Ryan looked at Edward with admiration, moved by his compassion and willingness to offer forgiveness even after being so mistreated. Abigail, too, was struck by Edward's generosity. She knew he was being incredibly gracious, especially after the way Andrew had treated him. This attitude made her respect Edward even more. Abigail paused, reflecting on Edward's request. She knew that offering Andrew another chance would be a significant gesture of mercy. After a moment of silence, she nodded. "If that's what you wish, Mr. Edward, I can reconsider," she said. "But Andrew will have to prove that he is capable of changing." Edward nodded, a satisfied expression on his face. "Sometimes all we need is someone to show us the right way," he replied, his voice full of quiet wisdom. With the tension finally dissipated, Abigail and Ryan returned to the table to complete the sale. The paperwork was soon finalized, and with the contract signed, the Ferrari was officially Edward's. The air in the dealership had shifted from one of confrontation to one of shared purpose and relief, as they all knew that the most important part of the day was still to come, making Arthur's dream come true. Shortly after the sale was completed, the atmosphere in the dealership was one of urgency and anticipation. Abigail, Ryan, and Edward knew that there was no time to waste. With the contract signed and the Ferrari ready to go, they decided to act immediately. The sun was beginning to dip in the sky, casting a golden light over the city as the day drew to a close. Edward, now holding the keys to the Ferrari, felt a mixture of responsibility and emotion weighing on him. He looked at Abigail and Ryan, who were both ready to follow him to the hospital where Arthur was admitted. They all understood that this moment couldn't wait. Edward took a deep breath, knowing that the journey ahead would be one of the most significant of his life. As they exited the dealership, they were united by a common goal: to bring joy and hope to a little boy who deserved nothing less. The gleaming, imposing Ferrari was parked in front of the dealership, its sleek lines and powerful presence almost as if it had been waiting for this moment. The engine purred with a low, throaty rumble, ready to carry Edward on the most important journey of his life. "Let's go right now," Edward said, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. "Arthur deserves this, and we can't waste any more time." Ryan, sensing the urgency in Edward's tone, nodded in agreement. "We'll be right behind you, Mr. Edward," he replied. With that, Abigail and Ryan quickly got into a second car, ready to follow the Ferrari to the hospital. As Edward drove the Ferrari through the city streets, the car moved with a silent elegance, effortlessly cutting through traffic. Its presence did not go unnoticed as heads turned as the sleek, red machine glided by, a symbol of both power and grace. But for Edward, this drive was more than just a trip through the city. It was a journey rich with meaning, each mile bringing him closer to fulfilling a promise to his beloved grandson. His heart pounded with anticipation, eager to see the joy in Arthur's eyes when he finally saw the car. The drive, though short, felt monumental. As Edward approached the hospital, the late afternoon sun cast the sky in warm hues of orange and pink, creating a stunning backdrop for the momentous event about to unfold. Edward carefully parked the Ferrari right in front of the hospital's main entrance, his heart beating fast with excitement and nerves. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of the patient's struggles. But today, something different was about to happen, something that would bring a moment of light into the heavy air. With Abigail and Ryan by his side, Edward walked through the hospital corridors with a determined stride, each step carrying the weight of the love and hope he had for his grandson. When they reached Arthur's room, they found Alice sitting beside her son's bed, holding his small hand tenderly. The weariness of countless days spent worrying for her child was etched on her face, but as she looked up and saw her father enter, followed by Abigail and Ryan, a spark of surprise and emotion lit up her eyes. She could sense that something extraordinary was happening. "Dad, what is going on?" Alice asked, standing up to embrace him. Edward returned her hug, his heart heavy with the emotions of the moment. "Alice," he began softly, his voice filled with the weight of what he was about to say. "I managed to fulfill Arthur's wish. I brought him a Ferrari. He's going to get the ride he's always dreamed of." Alice gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. She knew how much this meant to Arthur and her father. It was more than just a ride in a car. It was a symbol of love, hope, and the lengths her father would go to bring joy to his grandson. "You did this, Dad? You brought a Ferrari?" Alice asked, her voice shaking with emotion. Edward nodded, his own eyes glistening. "Yes, daughter, it is outside, waiting for him." Arthur, who had been lying down, overheard the conversation. Despite his weakness, his eyes widened in disbelief and excitement. "Grandpa, a Ferrari? For real?" he asked, his voice frail but filled with a hopeful longing. Edward walked over to the bed, gently taking Arthur's small hand in his. "Yes, my dear boy, a real Ferrari, just for you. Let's just take a ride. What do you say?" With the help of a nurse, Arthur was carefully prepared to leave the room. Alice and Edward gently helped him into a wheelchair, while Abigail and Ryan waited just outside, their hearts swelling with anticipation for the moment to come. As they wheeled Arthur out of the hospital, the late afternoon sun bathing them in its warm glow, the boy's eyes fell on the brilliant red Ferrari parked at the entrance. Arthur's face lit up like never before. The fatigue that had weighed him down seemed to evaporate, replaced by an electrifying excitement that brought color to his cheeks and light to his eyes. His gaze locked onto the Ferrari, and a wide, joyful smile spread across his face. A smile that spoke of dreams coming true, of a fleeting but precious victory over the hardships he had been enduring. For that moment, the pain and the illness that had overshadowed his young life faded into the background, overtaken by pure, unbridled happiness. As Arthur was carefully helped into the passenger seat of the Ferrari, the car's luxurious interior and the purring engine became his world, a world where, for a brief time, he could escape the reality of his condition and simply be a child living out a dream. Edward watched with a heart full of pride and love as Arthur settled into the seat, his small hands gripping the leather upholstery with awe. This was the moment he had hoped for, the moment where everything else melted away and only joy remained. With one final glance at Abigail and Ryan, who stood by with smiles of their own, Edward got behind the wheel. He turned to Arthur, his voice gentle but filled with excitement. "Are you ready, Arthur?" Arthur nodded eagerly, his smile never fading. "I am ready, Grandpa," he whispered, his voice filled with a mix of awe and joy. And with that, Edward gently pressed the accelerator, the Ferrari gliding forward, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a little boy, and the love of a grandfather who had made those dreams come true. "Grandpa, it's the most beautiful Ferrari I've ever seen," Arthur exclaimed, his voice filled with awe and admiration. Edward, his eyes glistening with tears of joy, looked at his grandson with a smile that conveyed all the love he felt. "And it's all yours today, Arthur. Let's take a ride." With great care, Ryan and Abigail helped Edward lift Arthur into the passenger seat of the Ferrari. Though Arthur was physically weak, the excitement on his face was unmistakable. He reached out to touch the steering wheel, his small hands gliding over the smooth dashboard. For a moment, he closed his eyes, as if to imprint every detail of the experience into his memory, savoring the feeling of being in the car he had always dreamed of. Edward climbed into the driver's seat, buckled up, and turned to Arthur, who was beaming beside him. "Ready, champ? Let's go." Arthur nodded eagerly, his smile never fading. As Edward started the engine, the Ferrari roared to life, its powerful sound resonating through the air, making Arthur's eyes shine even brighter. They set off, driving slowly at first, with Edward carefully navigating through the streets. Arthur soaked in every moment the sensation of speed, the deep rumble of the engine, and the world rushing by outside the windows. For that brief ride, all of Arthur's worries melted away. Every turn of the wheel and every acceleration brought a new wave of joy. It was a moment of pure bliss, a dream fully realized. When they eventually returned to the hospital, Edward gently parked the Ferrari in front of the entrance. Arthur turned to his grandfather, his eyes still sparkling with the thrill of the ride. "Thank you, Grandpa. This was the best day of my life," he said, his voice now soft but full of profound gratitude. Edward reached over and held Arthur's hand, his tears quietly flowing. "I would do anything for you, Arthur. Seeing you happy is all that matters." As they helped Arthur back into the hospital, the air was filled with a sense of something magical having taken place. Alice embraced her father tightly, her silent gratitude overflowing for everything he had done for her son. Abigail and Ryan, standing nearby, were also deeply moved, understanding that they had been part of something extraordinary, something that transcended mere business. In that quiet afternoon, a dream had been fulfilled, and a memory had been etched into the hearts of everyone present. The weeks following Arthur's ride in the Ferrari were bittersweet for the Miller family. The joy of that day lingered, a bright spot amid the darkness of what was to come. The sparkle in Arthur's eyes during that brief moment of happiness became a cherished memory, especially as the reality of his illness took its toll. True to the doctor's predictions, Arthur passed away shortly afterward, leaving a profound void in the hearts of those who loved him. Grief washed over Edward, Alice, and everyone who had known Arthur. Yet, amid the sadness, there was a deep sense of peace knowing that Arthur's wish had been fulfilled. For Edward, that ride wasn't just a final gift to his grandson, it was a lasting memory that would forever hold a place in his heart. Abigail and Ryan, too, were deeply affected by the experience. Arthur's story and Edward's unwavering love had left an indelible mark on them both. They realized that they couldn't let Arthur's memory simply fade away. It needed to live on, to inspire others as it had inspired them. One day as they walked through the dealership, Abigail shared her idea with Ryan. "We need to do more than just remember Arthur," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We need his story to inspire others. Let this rename the dealership in his honor." Ryan, moved by his mother's suggestion, immediately agreed. "That would be wonderful, Mom. Arthur's story can continue to live on here and serve as a reminder to all of us about the true value of our actions." And so, Abigail and Ryan set about planning the change. They wanted the dealership's new identity to reflect the values that Arthur had inspired in them: compassion, generosity, and the importance of making dreams come true. The dealership would no longer just be a place to buy luxury cars, it would become a beacon of the impact that kindness and love can have on the world. Meanwhile, Andrew, who had been fired after his confrontation with Abigail, experienced a profound personal transformation. The shock of nearly losing everything and Edward's unexpected plea for a second chance made him deeply reflect on his actions and his life. Humbled and introspective, Andrew began to change, seeking to become a better person, one who treated others with the respect and kindness he had previously lacked. In the end, the legacy of that one special day in the Ferrari would ripple outward, touching the lives of everyone involved. Arthur's story, and the love that made it possible, would live on not just in the renamed dealership, but in the hearts of all who heard it. Andrew's journey towards self-improvement began with small, but significant steps. He enrolled in a personal development course, dedicating himself to learning how to be more empathetic and considerate towards others. The course challenged him to confront his past behavior and inspired him to change his approach to life. It wasn't just about being a better employee or colleague, it was about becoming a better person. As the weeks went by, Andrew realized how much he had to learn and how much he had taken for granted. Feeling the need to express his gratitude, Andrew sought out Abigail one day, not to ask for his job back, but simply to thank her. "Miss Abigail," he began, his voice filled with humility and sincerity, "I know I made many mistakes and deserved to be fired. But Mr. Saltbecuster, Edward's kindness touched me deeply. I just wanted to thank you for giving me a second chance to become a better person." Abigail, who had always prided herself on her ability to read people, could see the genuine change in Andrew's demeanor. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held a quiet humility that spoke of hard-earned lessons. "Andrew," she replied, her tone warm, "I'm glad you took this opportunity. It's rare to find people who recognize their mistakes and strive to change. Keep up the good work, and who knows, maybe one day we can work together again." As the days turned into weeks, the dealership's renovation was finally completed. The transformation was more than just physical, it represented a new chapter, one filled with hope and purpose. The day of the grand reveal was set, and Abigail made sure it would be a special event. She invited Edward, Alice, and several friends and loyal customers to the ceremony. Everyone understood that this was not merely a commercial event, it was a celebration of life, of Arthur's legacy, and of the new beginning the dealership symbolized. Edward and Alice arrived early on the day of the ceremony, both visibly moved as they stood before the dealership's new facade. The name Arthur Miller Dealership was proudly displayed, with the words "Where Dreams Come True" written just below in smaller, elegant letter. The sight filled their hearts with a mix of emotions: pride, love, and a deep sense of peace, knowing that Arthur's memory was being honored in such a meaningful way. During the ceremony, Abigail took to the stage to deliver a heartfelt speech. Today, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We are here not just to unveil a new name, but to celebrate the life of a boy with a name. Arthur's memory will continue to live here, inspiring us all to be better and to help make the dreams of those around us come true." The audience was silent, each person deeply moved by Abigail's words. Then, Edward stepped forward, his eyes glistening as he prepared to speak. Arthur was always a lively boy, he said, his voice filled with emotion, and his biggest dream was to ride in a Ferrari. Seeing that dream come true was the greatest joy of my life. But what happened afterward, with everyone's support here, showed me that his spirit lives on. This dealership now bears his name, and with that, his memory will be a source of inspiration for everyone who walks through these doors. As the plaque was unveiled, the crowd erupted into applause. The words "Where dreams come true" gleamed in the sunlight, capturing the essence of what the dealership had become: a place where dreams could indeed come true. A place where hope and kindness were the driving forces behind every action. In the crowd, Andrew watched the proceedings with a smile on his face. The experience with Edward and Arthur had profoundly impacted him, setting him on a path of self-reflection and growth that he was determined to continue. After the ceremony, Andrew approached Edward once more, gratitude evident in his every word. "Mr. Edward," he began, "thank you again for the chance you've given me. I promise to keep working on myself and to live up to the kindness you've shown me." Edward nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Andrew's shoulder. "I believe in you, Andrew," he said simply. "We all can change, and I'm glad to see you are making the most of your second chance." From that day forward, the Arthur Miller dealership became more than just a place to buy luxury cars. It became a beacon of hope, a symbol of the fulfillment of dreams, and a testament to the power of second chances. Everyone who walked through its doors felt the presence of something special, something that transcended the ordinary transactions of business. Arthur's memory lived on, not just in the hearts of his family, but in the hearts of everyone who heard his story. The dealership became a place where compassion, generosity, and the belief that even in the hardest times, dreams could still come true were celebrated and nurtured. And in that way, the spirit of a little boy who loved exotic cars continued to inspire acts of kindness and the pursuit of dreams long after he was gone. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. We hope you found value in everything we've shared. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned so far? Please share one thing that stood out to you and how you plan to apply it in your life in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Simon. Your support means the world to us. And its support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more content like this. See you in the next video.